Hey guys, how's it going? This is FixerMed. Welcome back to my high yield anatomy review series for the USMLE Step 1, NBME CBSE, and NBME CAS examinations. This will be part 16 of my multi-part video series providing a broad overview of anatomy for these exams. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on today's content. So I'd like to open up talking about the cardiac shadow. The right border comprises of the superior vena cava and the right atrium, while the left border is comprised of the aortic arch, pulmonary trunk, left auricle, and left ventricle. And I've provided a picture to the right so you guys can visualize this a little better. Moving on. Next, we're going to be talking about auscultation of heart valves. There are 4 primary areas for auscultation, each corresponding to specific valve areas. The area located at the 5th left intercostal space near the midclavicular line is known as the mitral valve area. The region encompassing the 4th and 5th intercostal spaces near the lower sternal border is known as the tricuspid valve area. The location situated at the 2nd left intercostal space near the upper sternal border is known as the pulmonary valve area. The position found at the 2nd right intercostal space near the upper sternal border is known as the aortic valve area. Now, a good way to recall this information is a mnemonic known as all physicians take money. So all physicians take money. You can point that out on your body as you move along. So all physicians take money. Of course, anatomically speaking, you have to do it on the opposite end of yourself. So since this is on the left, this would be on your right when you're just standing up and starting. So just keep that in mind when you are recalling your auscultation areas for the heart valves. We'll be going into more detail on this in the cardio high yield review series. Moving on. Next, I'm going to talk about auscultation sites for mitral and aortic murmurs. Mitral murmurs are best heard at the apex of the heart, which is located at the 5th left intercostal space near the midclavicular line. Aortic murmurs are best heard at the aortic valve area, which is situated at the 2nd right intercostal space near the upper sternal border. A heart murmur is detected downstream of the valve. Stenosis manifests in the direction following the flow away from the valve. Insufficiency occurs in a direction opposite to the flow, back towards the valve. So orthograde and retrograde. Stenosis is orthograde and insufficiency retrograde, since flow away from the valve and back towards the valve. Moving on, let's go ahead and look at some questions. We have a 65-year-old male who presents to the emergency department with shortness of breath and chest pain. Physical examination reveals distended neck veins and decreased breath sounds on the right side of the chest. A chest X-ray reveals a widened mediastinum. An echocardiogram demonstrates an abnormal mass in the superior portion of the right atrium. Which of the following structures is most likely being compressed by this mass? All right, I think I gave you guys enough time here. If you need more time, please feel free to pause the video. Otherwise, moving on now. The superior portion of the right atrium is in close proximity to the superior vena cava and the entrance of the inferior vena cava, An abnormal mass in this location is most likely to compress the inferior vena cava, leading to elevated venous pressure, distended neck veins, and potentially contributing to the patient's symptoms of shortness of breath and chest pain. Therefore, the correct answer here is A, inferior vena cava. Let's go ahead and see why the other answer choices are incorrect. The left atrium. Left atrium is not typically in direct proximity to the superior portion of the right atrium. Additionally, compression of the left atrium would not explain the clinical findings described. Right ventricle. While the right ventricle is adjacent to the right atrium, it is not directly affected by a mass in the superior portion of the right atrium. Compression of the right ventricle would not explain the symptoms and physical examination findings described. Left ventricle. The left ventricle is not in close proximity to the superior portion of the right atrium and would not be affected by a mass in this location. Pulmonary arteries. The pulmonary arteries are located more posteriorly in the mediastinum and are not directly adjacent to the superior portion of the right atrium. Compression of the pulmonary arteries would not lead to the clinical presentation described. Let's go ahead and move on to the next question. During a routine physical examination, a 40-year-old female presents with a heart murmur. Auscultation reveals a systolic murmur heard best at the second right intercostal space near the upper sternal border. Which of the following is the most likely cause of this murmur? All right, I think I gave you guys enough time here. If you need more time, please feel free to pause the video. Otherwise, moving on now. A systolic murmur best heard at the second right intercostal space near the upper sternal border corresponds to the aortic valve area. Aortic valve stenosis is characterized by narrowing of the aortic valve orifice, leading to turbulent blood flow during systole. This results in a systolic murmur that radiates to the carotid arteries and is best heard at the aortic valve area. Therefore, the correct answer is D, aortic valve stenosis. Let's go ahead and see why the other answer choices are incorrect. Mitral valve stenosis. Mitral valve stenosis typically produces a diastolic murmur heard best at the apex of the heart, corresponding to the mitral valve area. Tricuspid valve regurgitation. Tricuspid valve regurgitation typically produces a hollow systolic murmur best heard at the lower left sternal border, corresponding to the tricuspid valve area. Pulmonary valve stenosis. Pulmonary valve stenosis typically produces a systolic ejection murmur heard best at the left upper sternal border, corresponding to the pulmonary valve area. Mitral valve regurgitation. Mitral valve regurgitation typically produces a hollow systolic murmur best heard at the apex of the heart, which corresponds to the mitral valve area. Ventricular septal defect. Ventricular septal defects typically produce a hollow systolic murmur heard best at the lower left sternal border, corresponding to the tricuspid valve area. We'll be going more into these details for murmurs and stenosis, etc., regurgitation, all that stuff in the cardio high yield review series. So don't feel bad if you're not understanding this. This is just for general anatomical purposes. And questions here associated with anatomy for the heart are going to be looking mostly like the murmur, stenosis, regurgitation questions, and we'll be going into the roots and details of those later. So moving on to the next question. During a routine physical examination, a 60-year-old male presents with a heart murmur. Auscultation reveals a diastolic murmur heard best at the second right intercostal space near the upper sternal border. Which of the following is the most likely cause of this murmur? All right, I think I gave you guys enough time here. If you need more time, please feel free to pause the video. Otherwise, moving on now. A diastolic murmur, heard best at the second right intercostal space near the upper sternal border, corresponds to the aortic valve area, where aortic valve regurgitation murmurs are typically heard. Aortic valve regurgitation is characterized by incompetence of the aortic valve, leading to backflow of blood from the aorta into the left ventricle during diastole. This results in a diastolic murmur that is heard best at the aortic valve area. Therefore, the correct answer is D, aortic valve regurgitation. Let's go ahead and see why the other answer choices are incorrect. Mitral valve stenosis. Mitral valve stenosis typically produces a diastolic murmur heard best at the apex of the heart, corresponding to the mitral valve area. Aortic valve stenosis. Aortic valve stenosis typically produces a systolic murmur heard best at the aortic valve area during systole, not diastole. Mitral valve regurgitation. Mitral valve regurgitation typically produces a hollow systolic murmur heard best at the apex of the heart, corresponding to the mitral valve area. Tricuspid valve stenosis. Tricuspid valve stenosis typically produces a diastolic murmur heard best at the lower left sternal border, corresponding to the tricuspid valve area. Pulmonary valve regurgitation. Pulmonary valve regurgitation typically produces a diastolic murmur heard best at the left upper sternal border, corresponding to the pulmonary valve area. That will do it all for today's content, guys. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And I said earlier, this was a general introduction to cardio concepts. We'll be going more into details about stenosis, regurgitation, other murmurs in the cardio high yield review series. So don't feel bad if these questions were a little hard based off the information presented. That's just how the NBME style questions are for cardio anatomy, since we're going from general anatomy to organ block anatomy now. So yeah, if you guys like this video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Otherwise, this is FixerMed signing off. Be sure to have a great day, good luck studying, and goodbye, everyone.